Hi there YouTube, XtremeTrainz here. So, we're finally up to the last Diapet review that I'm doing of this first wave of Diapet Thomas engines. And you can see, it's James. So what are we waiting for? Let's do it. Because James is a slightly bigger engine, he gets a bigger box, which just means that while the front is the same, you can see that's his number there, 9003. We get a nice big view of him from the side, which I think looks really good. You can see the same thing here. We've got the window with his face poking through. Looks to be an excellent James face, which is good. Same thing on the top, and then on the side we get a picture of James. Underneath you get a photo of him, which you didn't have in the others, as well as all the legal blah blah. Coming round to the back, you can see again we have a repeat of that here. We've got a photo here of the Thomas connecting to James. We've got the truck obviously moves. You can disconnect the engines, and it looks like he's got the piston details similar to Thomas. So then we come here, you can see that's the scale, what it looks like there, which I think looks pretty good, and that's pretty much it for the box. So what are we waiting for? Let's get into it. Alright, so here's James out of his packaging. Now in order to deal with him a little bit more easily, I'm going to uncouple him from his tender. We'll talk about that in a second. So we'll do the quick spin around so you kind of get an idea of what we are dealing with. Perfect, before we come to the face. Again, absolutely smashed it out of the park. These faces are excellent. Why Mattel doesn't get Japanese companies to do their faces for them, I don't know. Because this face is correct. This face is awful. Like, how hard is it to shrink this down to make it like this? I just refuse to believe getting the faces correct is that difficult, because these models, in the same way the Atomics ones have done it at a tiny scale, absolutely blow it out of the park. An excellent James face. Really well done here. Again, you've got the white running board, the 3 lamp irons. Unfortunately, no lamp for James, which I understand, but I also think it's a bit sad because it just means it looks funny because the other 2 have lamps and he doesn't. But again, you know, that it is what it is. You can see the details along there with the red there. You've got the coupling at the front. James looks a bit funny. I didn't put out in the other 2 engines, but they don't have like fake couplings on the front like some of the other lines do. I think there's probably another detail which is missing, which would be nice to have for the price. I think James looks particularly naked, for want of a better word, without it, just because this coupling is so much lower than the rest of his buffer beam. But otherwise, all good. On the side, black smoke box, nice gold dome. You've got the silver and also the gold as relief, so they are 3D. You can feel those lines, they look really crisp and printed on. You've got the nice little 3D dome on the top, printing here for the windows. The normal things on the side there. You can see that the back is all filled in with a black plastic block piece, which I think is fine. Coming around the back, you can see that's how that looks. Again, same on the other side. James has got different situation on the bottom. So the front truck is articulated a little bit. Not much, but I think that's fine. And it's actually got the kind of detailing I think it would be nice for them all to have. As you can see that the spokes don't go all the way through, but they are actually recessed in rather than just kind of printed on there. And I think that is really nice. I really like how that looks. Meanwhile, come to here and you can see James has a very similar setup to Thomas with that really cool looking mechanism here. Again, I think it's really cool. I don't know how useful it is. James feels a bit tighter, I think, than Thomas does. It's alright when he's rolling, but when you try and do it manually, he seems to get a bit caught. But again, they're obviously not designed to be used manually because of all those mechanisms. Again, the James wheels don't look too bad because James has black wheels. So the fact you can't see his wheels is fine. Although I think the wheels on James are the same size by the looks of things as the ones on Thomas. Yes, they are the same size. It's actually the same mechanism, I think. Nearly exactly the same, it's a different color. Which means that James's wheels are too small. James's wheels should be bigger than Thomas's, and they're not. This wheel's the right size, but these driving wheels are just a little bit too small, so he does feel a little bit top heavy because he has these like tiny little wheels on this really big body. So that's not quite right, but pretty close. Coming to the tender now, pretty simple, but they've got all the right details on it. The shape's right, coupling on the back there. Again, you've got that clear plastic bit on the bottom, which doesn't look too bad because there's lots of stuff going on. Again, I enjoy they've got the relief wheels here and the little coverings on them. You've got that same kind of soft, textury kind of coal, which I think looks fine. And then the way this works is there's a clip here, and there's a little bar here, and you just kind of push them together like this, and boom, the coupling is nice and tight. It goes side to side, just a little bit, but enough you can get all the corners. And then we start to see the issues with this model. His tender is too big. this should line up with this, but it doesn't. This is higher. So James's tender, I think, is too big, and it looks extra silly being big. A, because I think it's too big normally, but also because these wheels, I think, are a little bit on the small side, it just looks comically large. Like, James's tender just looks really, really big compared to the rest of him, which I think is strange, because James is actually, I think, quite iconically known for having quite a small tender compared to the rest of his body. So, yes, I think that is a little bit regrettable, but first, quickly, a comparison to... So, just for scale, there he is next to the Wood James, and again, one of them is much, much better. So, in that case, what would I improve about this model? So, I think his wheels are too small. These driving wheels need to be bigger, because while they don't look too bad from a distance, I think the problem is when you start getting up close, he just isn't quite in scale, and it looks a bit funny, and I'll show you that better by moving my camera down while I keep talking. And then obviously I think the scale issues with the, there you go, you can kind of see from the side, he just doesn't look quite balanced. The wheels are only this much when he's really tall, versus Thomas, for example, who looks quite balanced because the wheels take up the right amount of space. Whereas for James, I think the wheels need to be bigger. I don't think he needs to be any taller. He just needs to have wheels which come up further, you know, and go underneath those wheel wells rather than just sitting there the way they do. Equally, you can see the tender size problem a bit more now. The tender is just too large. I think the tender is about 10%, maybe even 15 to 20% too big, and that's a bit unfortunate too, because the rest of him is really nice. So they're the main issues I have with this model, is that I think he's just not quite scaled correctly, which is unfortunate because I think the other engines are scaled very, very well. Speaking of the other engines, let's bring those two little tank engines into the picture so we get an idea of the collection. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because James is actually substantially larger than the other two, and when I say substantially, I really do mean substantially. Like, look at that. He dwarfs Thomas, both in terms of length, in terms of height, in terms of his face. Like, look at the face, different sizes. And he obviously also then dwarfs Percy. So, I think James is just too big. He's good. I like him as a model. But I think his body is too big to compensate for the fact his wheels are too small. But then now he just looks comically large next to Thomas and Percy, who are, yes, small, but they're not this small compared to him. James just looks positively huge. James looks more like how I think Gordon should probably look in size versus Thomas, versus these two. So that's very strange. And I think that is actually a little bit of a problem, because these are meant to be a collector scaled line, and I think James by himself looks okay. You can get past the wheels, but when you start putting the other engines with them, James just looks absolutely huge, which he really shouldn't. As you can see, he just dwarfs the other engines, and I just don't really think that's very accurate to the show, which is unfortunate because I do like the design. So, final thoughts on James. I think he has the right details, and he looks very good, detail-wise, versus, you know, any other Thomas toy pretty much you could pick up from the shelf. But I think, unfortunately, for a collector's line, which is meant to be scaled and meant to be nice and is charging very premium prices, he just is not scaled correctly. His wheels are too small, his tender is too big, and then he's just too tall, and too, you know, too big. He's too big in every dimension, versus Thomas and Percy. And again, it may be the case that in the TV show, he is this big, but I think the problem is that it just looks silly, even if maybe the scale is weird. And as I said, they've obviously played around with the scale with these all toy lines, and I think they would have been better to play smaller on the smaller side and have James be smaller than he should be rather than bigger than he should be, particularly because they're releasing Hero in this line, who should dwarf all of these other engines. And I think the problem is that I think Hero will probably be about the same size as James, which is obviously a problem because Hero is meant to be a much larger engine. So I think they've kind of got themselves into a corner by making James so big, because it just means you can't make any of the other bigger engines as big as they should be, because you've already made James too large, and that loses the impact that you want it to have. So, for 60 Australian dollars, being that yes, James is more expensive than the Thomas and Percy, but not by much, considering how much extra engine you get, I don't think it's, like, you know, you get more than $10 extra worth of engine. If this is $50, this shouldn't be $60. It should be more like $75, I think. But again, I don't think any of them are worth the amount that you pay. I think, unfortunately, of the three, James is going to have to be my least favorite because the scaling is just not quite right. The play features, again, have hindered the way it looks, and I just think by himself he looks out of scale because his wheels are too small and his tender's too big, and when he's put with the other engines in this collection, he just looks way too big on a whole. So, unfortunately, I don't know if I can recommend James just because of the price. If you can get it for a decent price, sure, it's nice to complete the collection, but I think, you know, for 60 Australian dollars, no, I don't think this one's worth it. So, unfortunately, this review series ends on a low, which is a bit unfortunate, but I will be picking up Bertie and Hero, so we can pick that up in late September when those come out and finally get to my shores, rather. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video review. Make sure to go out and let me know your thoughts about this. I'd also be particularly curious to know what you think about the scale issue. You know, I'd love to know if people can have like proper photo comparisons of the models maybe next to each other, or the CGI models. That would be really interesting. I'd like to know if this is how big they're supposed to be and it's just every other merchandise line that's got James wrong. Alright, thanks for watching, guys. That's all we've got time for. This is XtremeTrainz.